Global competition is increasing at a steady pace. How come some regions develop and grow while others decline? And how come some companies can expand their business in fierce global competition while others are forced to shut down? One important answer is clusters that foster competitive firms and innovations. Clusters and innovation have also come to the forefront in policymaking. How can we design policies at international, national, regional, and local levels that strengthen innovation and competitiveness? These are some of the issues that will be discussed by several European experts in this series of programs on clusters, moderated by Professor Örjan Sölvell from Stockholm School of Economics.
So, welcome to the series on clusters. Today we are here to view the third program in the series, and it's about cluster management. How to organize and manage clusters and cluster organizations. The interest in building or constructing clusters has increased a lot during the last 20 years or so. And we can see in the number of cluster organizations that is growing by the day. And here in Europe, we now list more than 11 or 1,200 of these cluster organizations working with cluster development all around Europe. And of course, this also goes for all around the world. There is an increased interest in clusters and cluster management. If we go back to the first program, we talked about clusters as being either organic or more planned. And of course, there is a lot of space in between these two extreme points. And you could say that cluster initiatives is something in the middle between these two extreme points. And I often use the metaphor, it's like putting a turbo onto the engine rather than building a new engine. And this is what we're going to talk about today in more detail. And we will talk about four important issues. First, we will talk about the activities of these cluster initiatives and the objectives of them. Second, we will talk a little bit about the governance and financing of these cluster initiatives. And third, we will talk about the important role of the cluster manager or the cluster facilitator. And we have invited a few of those cluster managers here today to the program. Finally, we will turn to a very important question. It was also mentioned in the second program, we need to evaluate these initiatives. We need to figure out whether they make any sense, whether they add to dynamism, whether they add to innovation, they create jobs, and so forth. In the studio today, I invited three guests from around Europe. You're all welcome here. First, we have Jorge Sanchez from Greece, involved in the Coralia initiative. You're very welcome here.
Thank you very much.
We have Øyvind Mikkelsen from Norway, who's the head of the Oslo Renewable and Environment Cluster. Welcome here. Finally, we have Staffan Bjurulf from region Värmland, which is one of the regional actors on the Swedish cluster scene, working with a number of clusters in the north mid part of Sweden. Welcome here.
Thank you very much.
I will host this program today with Ifor Ffowcs-Williams, one of the world-renowned experts on cluster management and cluster initiatives. Very welcome here to the program. You've come a long way, all the way from Nelson, New Zealand, up here to cold Stockholm. Welcome here.
Thank you, Örjan. And I have the opportunity to travel around the world quite a lot. And I've visited perhaps clusters in 40 countries so far. And let me start perhaps by sharing with you one of the common elements that I see, particularly as a clustering initiative is starting to pick up speed. Because as we've already described, we're not inventing a cluster, but rather understanding how do we turbocharge an existing cluster. And one of the key things I find around the world is, as we start, the culture between the different stakeholders in the cluster can be symbolized like this. It's firms that are isolated from each other, uncomfortable in engaging. It is universities that are remote, often a clutter of government agencies trying to address the needs of that particular cluster, that particular community. And it takes time to open up from that culture to a more open culture particularly where tacit information is flowing amongst the stakeholders. So what in practice are these clustering initiatives doing, besides in a general sense changing the culture? And if I go back to the Green Book, this is a very useful description looking here at 150 clustering initiatives from around the world. And encourage people to dig into the Green Book to have a look at this in more detail. And it's showing that for each of these clustering initiatives, there is no one silver bullet. There is a range of activities, often relating to training, sometimes very specific training, sometimes it's R&D, it's platform technologies, sometimes it's market development, export development, so a wide range of activities. And each of the clustering initiatives that I've seen around the world certainly have got a portfolio of activities. And sometimes some firms are benefiting just from one element of that portfolio, sometimes from right across the portfolio of activities.
Okay, thank you, Ifor. We will start to listen to three cluster managers to hear about their experience from running clusters, and also the president of a university that has become more and more involved in cluster work and in connections to industry in their region in the north mid Sweden.
What we've done over the last couple of years is built a strong cluster brand on an international level. And that really helps us to attract talent, companies and resources to the region and the cluster as such. We spin off some 6 to 7 high-tech companies and create some 100 new jobs every year as an outcome of the cluster work. Another important outcome of the cluster is the building of the regional brand, the region where we built the research labs and the development labs, of course. Another thing with the cluster method is that it helps us to build strong, competitive companies that can work with innovation on an international arena.
Closeness to and understanding of SMEs is important when you want to give the right activities and support at the right time. Network meetings and around 500 companies visit give trust and confidence.
One of the results of Paper Province more than 10 years of cluster development is the facility you can see right behind me here. This is a pilot machinery that we open up for small and medium-sized companies to testing and developing their products to be more competitive in the international market. And this pilot machine is actually world unique, and I am very proud of the result that we got out of this.
We choose to put business here in Säterstrand because it's very close to our premises and because we see the possibilities to growth with our lab capacity and our test competencies here in the area. And we can see collaboration with other companies that have the same interest in this area. Compare is very important for this cooperation is because together, even if we are a smaller or bigger company, it's easier to develop long-term businesses, and it's easier to work in this collaboration in this area together with the other companies, as I said, as they have the same interest in the area, and together with the university as well.
Well, we're trying to be a modern university, and as a modern university, we try to mainstream this cooperation with the surrounding society to help the companies to develop, and also to help the university to develop, because we are trying to have a dialogue. We have to have a somewhat different profile compared to the older universities, and I think this is a very good one and a very interesting one, and it's interesting to develop it because it is a kind of a new role model for a university, and it's interesting also in an international perspective to try to develop it as far as it goes.